Hi, and welcome to Coping During the COVID Crisis. I'm Janet Gross. Throughout the pandemic, we've all realized that there's more than just a COVID crisis going on. This virulent virus has spawned crisis after crisis, economic, social, educational, and what we've been talking about all along here, a mental health crisis. And of course, that's why Dr. Roy Salgado, professor of counseling at the University of Holy Cross, is here. This is something I think mental health professionals kind of predicted right from the get-go.
Yes, and now 2 years plus into it, we see what the impact has been. Not only has the virus impacted the health of many in our community, and then impacted with regard to deaths as well, but the virus, whether you contracted it or not, has impacted beyond the physical health of individuals, that of one's mental health and well-being. We have all been impacted. Most of us have been impacted in one way or another with anxiety, with depression, with fear. And then beyond that, many others have been impacted with regard to addiction, perhaps speech issues for younger children, and suicide ideation. All of those numbers are on the rise. And during the initial lockdowns, there were concerns of unreported cases of perhaps child abuse, domestic violence, things of that nature. And we now see 2 years into it that in fact has been the case. We have seen that children perhaps experienced child abuse, physical abuse in nature that wasn't detected or reported in schools because they were out for so long. Domestic violence as well, we see 2 years later that did increase. Suicide ideation, we see 2 years later that did go up. 2 years later, we see that addiction went up. And unfortunately, overdoses as well as non-overdose deaths related to fentanyl use has gone up as well. So 2 years into it, we see those numbers, they all went up, and they're all mental health related.
And is it like a magnifying glass of everything that has been going on even, before this, and then it just exacerbates,
When you're struggling already, and before the pandemic, individuals have struggled with anxiety, depression, what have you. But when you're struggling and then you're put in an isolated situation, for those individuals that are struggling, they're compounded. So for those individuals who perhaps did not have a mental health issue, who did not struggle with anxiety, who did not struggle with depression, we're faced with the situation that we have had to contend with for 2 years. Those individuals, their stress went up, their anxiety went up, and maybe some sort of fear and depression perhaps set in. For those who did not have mental health issues, for those who did, they were compounded when in isolation. And all the other factors that came into playing, those factors that really exacerbated their already existing conditions. And so here we are with 2 years into it, seeing the impact that the response had to the virus.
So we are continuing, as you just said, to see that. This will likely continue too, right? I mean, we don't see any signs of that letting up.
Right, and so here we are. March, we're going into our third year. We'll be going into the third year of the pandemic. Here we are at the end of 2 years of the pandemic. And we're going to continue with the mitigation measures. And so we perhaps need to look at what the past 2 years have been like, see what the impact of those mitigation measures have been, and adjust accordingly so as to mitigate these other circumstances. We can't risk losing people to suicide, overdoses, abuse, and the other mental health issues that present themselves as a result. We need to figure out a way to keep ourselves safe from the virus, but as well as protect those who are more vulnerable to these other conditions.
Okay, so let's talk about this, because this is also an issue. All these people needing help, all these people looking for help.
Yes.
There's still a finite number of people to help, of professional mental health, people out there who can help. They're jammed, right?
Right. All of my colleagues, everyone that I know is overwhelmed. Think about this. Mental health professionals are overwhelmed and booked, completely booked with regard to being able to provide services. There's only so many, and there's only so many hours in the day to be able to provide services. And so we are finding ourselves in that situation. People are reaching out. Fortunately, we do have mental health professionals out there to be able to help. We're reaching a point, however, where everyone is providing services, and there are more and more people identifying themselves as wanting and in need of that type of service.
Because I think this is the crisis itself and the mental health issues that go along with it. They've really been brought out in TV or the public and everything, and it's becoming more acceptable, maybe, to some people?
Yes. There's not as much of a stigma today with regard to mental health services as there had been perhaps 20 or 30 years ago. So that's very fortunate that there has been education in terms of saying it's okay to say that I need help, that I'm struggling with an emotional, behavioral, psychological issue. There's no shame in that. We're human beings and we're going to respond to crisis situations, to difficult situations in a certain way. It's going to come out either in an emotional way, a cognitive way, a behavioral way. We're humans, that's okay. And I think we've finally gotten to a point in our history where we realize, okay, that's how human beings respond in a crisis situation. I need help, I can't handle it on my own.
And so you add on top of that the ability to go see someone without going to see them.
Yes.
So it makes it easier. Maybe a feeling of more anonymity, or I don't know what it is, but.
Well, the provision of services through telemental health practices has made it more convenient and accessible. And that convenience and accessibility has been very helpful to that end, that individuals can now, from the comfort of their own home or their workspace or wherever they may be, that they can dial into a session. To drive to a session, it takes an hour out of your day, then the hour that you're there, the hour back. It's a half a day commitment to go to see a counselor or a therapist. Now with the miracle of modern technology and telehealth, that commitment has been reduced and you're able to kind of squeeze it in and fit it in more conveniently.
But does that, I think that adds to the load probably?
Yes.
Because now, okay, you're not seeing somebody for an hour and then you have the transition and then there's another person, these are just probably.
Yes. You're clicking in and out of one session, hour after hour after hour after hour. And so yes, there is that overload, which makes it convenient in one respect, but then because of that convenience, you're filling in that hour, those gaps with even more people. And we don't have that many counselors or therapists in the world. In the state of Louisiana, there are approximately 7,000 licensed professional counselors and licensed marriage and family therapists. And there are X amount of social workers and psychologists. So when you think about that, whatever that would be, let's say that there's 15,000 mental health providers in the state. Don't quote me on that number in terms of overall mental health providers, but let's just say 15,000.
It doesn't sound many when you consider the population.
When you think of the population, it's not enough to meet the need.
Wow. And so that's got to add a lot of stress to clients and professionals.
Yes. Whoa. It's very stressful. And you're wanting to be able to provide that need. You're wanting to be there for the members of our community. And unfortunately, we're at a point where we're having to say, no, I'm going to have to refer you to someone else because you're going to see a client at 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night? That's just not possible.
And are there people to refer to? I mean, really, everybody's jammed, right?
Everybody is jammed. However, the promising thing is as people terminate, as people get better, as people overcome their issue, spots become available. So I like to offer potential clients some hope in that I can't see you today nor next week, but I'm about to terminate with someone in about 3 or 4 weeks. We're reaching that point where they are getting better with alleviating their symptoms, but I can put you on a waiting list that perhaps you can be seen in 3 to 4 weeks. Now those waiting lists are getting rather long. People are calling in and they're being told it's going to be 2 and 3 months before they're able to see somebody. But nevertheless, I would go ahead and put myself on that waiting list. It's better to put yourself on that waiting list and receive that service in due time 4, 6, 8 weeks down the road, as opposed to not, because that time's going to pass anyway. And your symptoms are going to continue to perhaps impede your ability to function in your daily life activities. And so the more that is elongated, the more complex and the more compounded the symptomology and the diagnosis will be. So we strongly recommend that regardless of you being told you may have to be put on a waiting list, be put on that waiting list. The days and weeks will pass and you will be seen at some point.
And I see good news even in that message that you're hearing it, people are getting better.
Yes.
So they're okay, that's encouragement. I want on that waiting list because I want to get better.
And to that point, it's important for people to realize that and have that hope. Counseling is not meant to be lifelong.
Forever.
It's not meant to be forever. That's psychoanalysis, which is a whole other conversation. Psychoanalysis is a lifelong, introspective, psychodynamic work. Counseling has a beginning, a middle, and an end. You have a presenting issue. You go in with the presenting issue. You present the symptomology. There's interventions along with your medical provider, your mental health provider, the counselor. and you resolve it. You resolve it in a defined period of time, and then you move on with your life.
Okay.
And so there is hope.
And we're going to take a break on that note, and we'll talk more about this in a minute. When we come back, more about what a mental health crisis can do to individuals and to society. Stay with us.
Louisiana needs a hero.
Someone to look after it, preserve it.
We have to do something now.
If everybody took care of their spot, we wouldn't have this conversation.
We all have to do our part.
The power is yours. All you have to do is pick it up.
Care about it. Protect it. Save it.
Be an everyday hero.
Keep Louisiana beautiful.
And welcome back. We're going to jump right into this. Earlier we were talking about, you can actually get through. There's a beginning, middle, and end to counseling. But at what point does a mental health condition become chronic?
That's a great question. It's important for us to realize that as human beings, we respond to adverse situations, and a situation or a problem presents itself, and you respond to it. You get anxious, you get fearful, you get depressed, you get whatever. Once the situation passes and that symptomology subsides, it is what it is. Human beings respond to that, whether you're a porcupine in terms of that type of organism, or an ant, or a snake that hisses, or a cat, or a human being. Once a perceived threat passes, then the pine needles go down, or for the porcupine, the snake relaxes, the cat puts his claws back in. The human being can breathe. So the situation, the threatening situation has surpassed. Done. That's a normal response to a threat. It becomes chronic once the situation is no longer there, even though the pandemic consists, but if it lasts longer than 30 days. There's a definition, there's a term that we look, or a point that we look for. If something persists over 30 days in terms of mental health diagnoses, even though the threat can be mitigated in some factor. Now, I know that we're talking about a pandemic that has lasted 2+ years, but nevertheless, an individual situation doesn't necessarily call for an anxious state or a depressed state or a given state for longer than 30 days. Then it becomes a chronic issue. What we've seen is, because we're all dealing with this right now, we've been dealing with this for 2+ years, we're all experiencing a chronic state of anxiety. Not all. Many of us, let me take that back, many of us are experiencing a chronic state of anxiety, a chronic state of depression, and perhaps other diagnoses as well. And so we need to pay attention to that. We don't operate well. We're in that constant state when our symptomology persists for an extended period of time. And medically and mental health-wise, psychologically, it's 30 days.
So does that mean that it's more difficult to counsel? Is it more difficult to come out of?
It means that it needs to be addressed.
Okay.
If something happens to someone, for example, you get into a car accident. Okay, you get into a car accident and then you're gun shy for the days and weeks that follow. That's natural. That's not anything that particularly needs attention. Time will heal those wounds, and then you'll be able to get back in your car and drive, and it won't be an issue. If it persists beyond a point that is no longer helpful and your daily living activities are impacted by it, be it work, school, relationships, your own ability to do the things that you need to do, if it goes beyond that, 30 days is that marker that we tend to look to see, then perhaps mental health professional help is something that could be of benefit.
Okay, but it's still the same process as far as going through?
It's the same process. Now the thing is, if somebody experiences anxiety for 30+ days, they go and get mental health services. Okay, we begin that process. It's perhaps not going to be so challenging to find interventions if it's early on. If somebody has experienced anxiety for 2 years or depression for 2 years, those habits, we're creatures of habit. The longer one engages in something, the more challenging it is to break that person of that response. And so we don't want to let things go on too long, but we do. I get clients who come in years after they've been experiencing something. So that client perhaps is going to be more of a challenge to intervene. Somebody might come in and right away say, you know what, this happened to me 2 months ago and I'm seeing that I need help. That person might have better outcomes in the sense that the outcomes might happen more quickly. It's not to say that those who have experienced something for an extended period of time, it won't be beneficial. It just might take a little bit more time. But there is benefit and there is hope in receiving counseling, in receiving mental health services. And I wouldn't say to anyone, oh, it's been so long that you won't receive
no
any
hope
benefits.
for you.
There's no hope for you. That's never a situation.
You never want to hear that.
That's never a situation. There is always hope, and there's always the ability to get better. It might be challenging in some instances, or more challenging in some instances than other, but nevertheless, there's still hope. If there wasn't hope, I wouldn't be doing this as a profession.
Right.
And so I know that there's hope. I see it. I see people grow through their situations and learn from their situations and instill new ways of approaching life and benefit from it and become stronger and come out better and stronger on the other side of life's crises. And so I strongly recommend that if somebody thinks that they need the help, to seek it.
So, you know, I find it interesting that you say that, you know, I'm coming to the end of this person is getting better, but you can see that.
Yes.
You know it's going to be a couple more times or
Yes.
whatever.
And it feels great. And I love, one of my favorite parts of the counseling process or the therapeutic process is to announce to someone, you know what? I think that our relationship here, this therapeutic relationship, is reaching its climax. It's reaching its end. What is your thought? And they're like, I kind of see that too. I don't see that I necessarily have to come here. And then they always apologize. And say, I'm sorry, I love you, you've been very helpful, but I don't think that I want to nor need to see you. I'm like, that's great. I don't want you to have to see me either.
Right.
I want you to be able to take the skills that you've acquired while we've been engaging in this process and apply them independently. And they do. And then we work toward terminating and closing out a case and the individual moving on with their life and doing so successfully.
Man, you know, I want to bring up right now because, you know, the University of Holy Cross offers this free service during the COVID crisis.
You know, and that's one of the wonderful things. If you could say that there's a silver lining in such a dark cloud that has been hanging over our heads for the past 2 years, is the fact that the University of Holy Cross, that the Maronites of Holy Cross have been offering free of charge free telemental health services to residents of Louisiana. And all you have to do is call in, and the administrative assistant will take that call, forward it to the clinical director, who will then triage it to a counselor in training and offer this service free of charge. And therapy is not cheap. Whether you're paying out of pocket or third-party reimbursement for insurance, it's not cheap.
Right.
But the fact that it's available free of charge to residents of Louisiana through the University of Holy Cross's Thomas C. Chambers Counseling and Training Center is a very good thing.
It is. It gives people maybe who couldn't afford it, who have never tried it, who have, you know, just don't know what to do. I mean, you're telling exactly what happens in a session here, and it's easy to get on the waiting list.
It is.
I'm sure there are waiting lists for the counselors there too.
It is. When you have something as good as we are providing, and it's free, we do have a waiting list. However, the benefit of the University of Holy Cross's Counseling Center is that we have a large number of providers. We have over 80 counselors in training that are there and who are eager to take on cases because they're learning, they're being supervised by the faculty there, by their clinical supervisors, and so they're eager. They're wanting to help members of the community. And so even though we are all overloaded and overwhelmed, but we're eager to serve our community.
That's great. That's great. All right, we're going to take another break, but when we come back, we're going to talk more about the mental health crisis with COVID. Stay with us.
You're there for them. We're here for you. Find free care guides at aarp.org/caregiving.
And we're back. Certainly the word pandemic speaks to the size and scope and geography of this virus. And with COVID, the contagion isn't the only thing that's been spreading. Dr. Salgado, so many other troubles and issues and things like that have come up. And, you know, we were just talking during the break about the overload of mental health professionals. Normally in something, the professional isn't going through exactly what you're going through. but we're all going through a pandemic.
Right.
That's got to be, isn't that a weird situation to be in where you can't get, I mean, it's not somebody else's, it's your issue
It
too.
truly is. It truly is, because when someone comes in with a presenting issue prior to the pandemic, they come in with a presenting issue, it's specific to them. Whatever traumatic experience they may have had, whatever interpersonal dynamic that they may be contending with, they bring it in and we work to find solutions or interventions toward that end. When they come in with presenting issues that perhaps are exacerbated, linked to, or associated with the pandemic, we are not immune. We don't live in a vacuum. We too are dealing with the impact of the pandemic. And so perhaps identifying more with the client and joining in a new way. And with all of the politics that has come with it, this virus, unlike other viruses, perhaps has come with politics, and then people coming in with their perspectives, their worldviews, and then making statements that we're not immune to. Having to keep that line and be professional and meet them where they are and join them and validate the perspectives, whatever their perspective may be. And it can be tricky, but fortunately we're professionals and we have been trained on how to be able to manage something that perhaps might also resonate with us. There's concepts called transference and countertransference in therapy, that when there's something that perhaps triggers the therapist, something that perhaps rises things up in us, that we have to keep that in check. We have to bracket it and be professional and be there for the client, for the person who's receiving that service. So we're able to do it. We're professionals. We're consummate professionals. And we're there and we meet people regardless as to what their thoughts, their ideologies, their perspectives, their worldviews, all are welcome at the table of counseling, and we're there to help.
Boy, you can't get away from it though. I mean,
can't.
when you hang up the phone or you get off Zoom or you close the door or whatever, you're still in the pandemic. There are
We're
still
still in the
issues that
pandemic.
you guys are going through. So I think that's got to be a real,
One of the
itself.
common things that has come up, not only with myself but with other clients, some have asked, "Are you vaccinated?" It's a very interesting question, and then I kind of process that with them, and I kind of throw it back. It's like, well, what would make you feel comfortable to know that I'm vaccinated, that I'm not vaccinated? I said, I'm here. We meet all the mitigating factors, but I'm not going to share with you my personal story. You're here to share yours. And so I'm here for you. And know that all the measures that are necessary for me to be able to be an effective provider to you is there. Because people are starting to ask these types of questions in a way that they hadn't before. People
Right.
are asking questions about the provider in a way that they hadn't before, and having to navigate that because it does start to get tricky.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, let me ask you this. What if, speaking of mental health counseling, what if maybe you don't feel you need counseling, but you think you know somebody who does?
That's a great question.
How do you negotiate that? Well, how can you help someone?
Well, destigmatizing counseling, destigmatizing mental health conditions. If somebody breaks their leg and they need to go to the emergency room to tend to it, and say, you know what, it looks like you may have really hurt your leg. Let me take you to the emergency room, or you might want to go and get that checked out, go to the doctor. Or somebody has a persistent cough. It's like, you've been coughing for quite a while. You probably want to go get that checked out so you can get that treated. Similarly, if somebody is presenting issues that deal with, affective responses to things, they're coming across as more anxious or they're sad for a prolonged period of time, to say, you know what, I've been noticing this change in you. You've been a little more irritable lately than you typically are. Is there something going on? Maybe getting professional help, maybe talking to someone about it might be of benefit, and letting them know the resources in the community, including that of Holy Cross, and destigmatizing it. And it's no different than needing to treat a fractured leg or a cough or anything else. It is a health condition, a mental health condition that deserves the respect and treatment that any other condition would need.
And I guess, would it be best to say, or to not bring it up again? So did you call? That kind of thing. Did you, maybe that's something too, so that, I don't know.
I personally, if I have had someone in my sphere that I think could benefit from counseling, I'm not going to badger them over the head with it, but I'll mention it. So you know what? I think that there's someone that you could talk to that would be very helpful. I know someone. I happen to know many people that could be of benefit, and I can set it up for you. And so just to be there as support, or maybe I wouldn't be their counselor because I am a family member, a friend, or a loved one, but know that I'm here for you. You know, reaching out to them in that way.
Okay. All right. We're down to final tips before we go. So you have any tips?
Yes, it's important to stay connected. You know, this whole pandemic that has kept us isolated for much of the time, it's important to stay connected with one another. And if you find, because that's helpful to mitigating anxiety, depression, and feelings of isolation and all of that. So staying connected with your family, friends, people in your community. If that in of itself is not sufficient, then perhaps seeking professional help and calling a provider in your area, including those at the University of Holy Cross.
And get on the wait list.
Get on the wait list.
Okay. So what is happening at the University of Holy Cross?
The University of Holy Cross, we are busting at the seams. Just like we're overwhelmed with regard to counseling services and things of that nature, we are busting at the seams with regard to the programs of study. We have over 65 programs at the bachelor's, master's, and doctoral level, both in-person learning and online learning.
Okay.
Go ahead and check us out and see what you might be interested in and start a new path and a career and have new things happen for you.
Fresh beginnings, right?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Dr. Roy Salgado, and all of your colleagues at the University of Holy Cross for helping us. And thank you for watching, because we want to help as we are all coping during the COVID crisis.